Perfect. So thank you so much for the kind introduction and for having me here today. It's a pleasure to talk about this paper that was recently published in the Business Strategy and the Environment. So this is a paper that was in fact an industry-driven paper. So it was supported by the Australian Retailers Association. And as you see at the moment, I am at the University of Queensland, but at the time of writing, I was actually at the Queensland University of Technology. So that's why you see both of the logos there. So just a bit about me. I'm currently a research fellow at the University of Queensland. That's where I have done my master's as well. Then I did my PhD at Queensland University of Technology. And throughout my studies and my research fellowship, I had the opportunity to work with many industry partners, including the Australian Retailers Association. So let's start with the rationale for a circular economy, which is, I'm not going to talk much about this because we are in this center now in this event, so we all know why we have to talk about the circular economy. And what I would like to deep dive into is more about the consumer aspect. So why we need to have a look at the consumers. So in this new economic system where there is no end of life concept, and here on purpose, I'm only using the simplified version of recycled, reused, and recovered materials. But in this new system, this is a collaborative system where consumers play a key role. And we know from the literature that consumers, in fact, they are showing an increasing awareness of ecological impact. They are demonstrating pro-environmental behavior. And in fact, literature also shows that there is a direct link between this pro-environmental behavior and a higher willingness to pay for this type of products. However, the issue is that we also know from literature that when it comes to second-hand products and reused products, the consumers, they also show some sort of resistance to these products because they perceive that there is some inferiority or lower functionality. Often they have a lack of knowledge of these products. And this is where there is an interesting and complex dynamic in the circular economy, because while it promotes environmental benefits, that may create a positive consumer response, there is an emphasis on the reuse aspect of the materials, which may create that negative consumer reaction. And we know that the current literature, it focuses heavily on the production and the supply side of the things, but there is less emphasis on the demand and the consumption. So there is a need for better understanding the consumer's willingness to buy and pay for these circular products. And this is why we have been investigating the research question: how do consumers perceive the CE, the circular economy, across product categories, and how does this perception impact their willingness to pay for these products? So we have investigated the literature to understand in the circular economy context, consumer behavior, consumer willingness to buy and pay for circular products, and the perception of circular products as well. So I'm just going to touch on some of the main things here. But essentially, consumers are the trendsetters, and they are primary stakeholders. And their consumer behavior is usually impacted by contextual and personal characteristics, by also their knowledge of the new product offerings. We also know that usually they estimate what's the perceived cost and benefits when they are trying to buy or when they are buying a new product. However, it's also very known that in the circular economy, there is a new value proposition being introduced. So this kind of changes what we know about consumer behavior as of now. And in the new circular economy, there is a perceived risk associated with the recycled and refurbished products. So this might change how consumers think about this new circular value proposition. And this is why, in addition to just looking at whether they would adopt these products, it's important to understand at what cost. So how much would they be willing to pay for it? And so willingness to pay, in brief, is the amount a consumer is prepared to pay for a good or a service. And this as well can be influenced by various factors, including demographics, product type, labeling frameworks, and contextual elements. And in general, what the consumers has as values and responsibilities within society. So some of the examples we know from literature is that higher income is associated with greater willingness to pay, Females, so in terms of the gender aspect, females are usually shown to show greater willingness to paying a premium for environmentally friendly products. And it is also shown that for a lower environmental impact, there is usually a greater willingness to pay associated as well. So from this one, we had our first hypothesis that consumers who are more likely to buy circular economy products are more willing to pay for circular economy products. But then we also have been looking at the perception of the circular economy products and how it is being impacted. And usually the perception of products is made of by factors such as product performance, such as the functionality of the product, the perceived incentives that the consumers can get, such as the lower price, the quality of the product, like between the old and the new product, and the risk and benefits as well. And in terms of the innovation, because we know that circular economy is indeed introducing new innovative elements in the products, it's important to understand what's the perceived relative advantage, the compatibility, the complexity, trialability, and the observability between traditional products and circular products. So based on this, we came to our second hypothesis, which was the perception of the performance of circular economy products moderates the relationship between the likelihood of buying and the willingness to pay for circular products. And in terms of the perception of the difference one person can make by purchasing these products, we have been looking at how consumers think about these aspects. And there is a link between the environmental benefits compared to traditional alternatives. And consumers show an appreciation towards these innovative attributes when there are sustainable features. And this is where there could be an advantage towards the circular economy products, because it can really shift the consumer valuation from a cost-centered assessment to one where they actually value a long-term sustainable value and environmental benefit in a product. And this is where we came to the third hypothesis, that the perception of the difference that would be made by buying the circular economy products would moderate the relationship between the likelihood of buying and the willingness to pay for circular economy products. And lastly, we have been also investigating the perception of the retailers. So how does this link impact the willingness to buy and pay for circular products? And essentially, we found from the literature that when there is a trust in retailers, it can significantly impact the consumer perception and the behavior. We also know that retailers' sustainable action and interaction can shape how consumers are acting towards these new products. And in fact, it's the retailers' credibility, legitimacy, transparency, and how they are communicating their commitment towards sustainability that can in fact create a higher willingness to pay a premium for these products. So this is how we came to our fourth hypothesis. And altogether, and this is of course in the paper as well, the hypothesized research framework that we have been investigating. And what we did was a quantitative online survey analysis in August 2021. We had a sample size of 607 Australian respondents, equally distributed across the three largest Australian states. So New South Wales, Queensland is where I'm based, and Victoria. And for the measures, we looked at likelihood to buy, willingness to pay, perceived performance, and retailer perception throughout 17 questions. And as you see here on the screen, we investigated product categories. So that was one of the main angles in this research, to understand the different perceptions across product categories. So we looked at altogether 11 distinct product categories, from home furnishing to personal health consumables. And we, in fact, were looking at the Australian retail sector specifically, which is quite a big sector in Australia, employing almost 10% of the population. And some of the results. So what we found is that the consumers demonstrated strong familiarity with circular economy products. 79% of them could identify circular economy products. And this was interestingly mainly among the young people and also male individuals, which we found interesting. We also found that consumers are prioritizing more the personal and financial benefits that they can get from these products rather than more the sustainable and environmental angle. For example, they were focusing more on the future savings that they could get, for example, from energy efficient products. In terms of their self-perception of the change that they are making, it was a positive impact. And the retailer perception was also a positive impact in terms of retailers who are selling these type of products. They were viewed as companies who care about the planet and they are socially responsible. And what we could conclude from these results is an interesting market opportunity, because these demographic insights show us they can inform the targeted marketing for the retailers, but it's also an interesting talent management approach for the retailers on how to get to these people. And in terms of the product performance, so we had a look at how people perceive the performance of the products across the different categories. And we found an above average for most categories, except for personal health consumables and cosmetics. So that was the lowest rated ones. And the highest performance was given for product categories like packaging and containers and home furnishing. In terms of the willingness to buy, we found some level of likelihood for buying for all the categories. But again, we could see the difference that people were more likely to buy the packaging and containers, household products, or electronics if they were made as circular products, whereas they were less likely to buy personal health consumables and cosmetics. And then we, of course, investigated the willingness to pay aspect. And interestingly, we found that consumers were less likely to pay at least the same price than for like the traditional original products. And in fact, more than that, they expected to pay even a lower price than new, because there was this expectation that these manufacturers, they are reusing the same product, so it shouldn't cost more to them. And from this one, we could see that, and we could theorize that the product categories that directly impact personal health and safety, they are the ones that receive significantly lower performance ratings, and there is a higher risk, perceived risk associated with them. We also we asked the question of what would be some of the reasons that consumers are not willing to buy this product. And interestingly, again, we found that the main reasons are related to the higher prices. So again, it justifies that willingness to pay finding earlier. The other reasons were lower quality and the easier to buy a new one. So the convenience of having a traditional new product. And that's why they wouldn't buy a circular one. And essentially what we found through these studies and from this, what we concluded is that consumers are still primarily motivated by the personal financial savings. And even though they show that they are aware and they care about the ecological and social reasoning, when they had to make the reasoning and the selection, it was still motivated by the financial aspect, how they can save money in the future with these environmental benefits as well. We also found that the consumers expect the circular economy products to be more affordable because they were generally unwilling to pay a premium for that. And as for the demographics, and remember that this is in the Australian context, but we found that it's the young male consumers who were found to be more informed and who were showing a greater willingness to buying and paying for circular economy products. And lastly, which was one of the key findings of this paper, and we wanted to show this difference, is that we found the difference between the perceived product performance of circular economy products, and it was different between the categories that we put forward in the paper. And so we found that products that are directly affecting a consumer's health and safety, such as the health consumables or cosmetics, they are the ones that have a perceived lower performance, whereas others, such as the packaging and furniture, that they don't have a direct impact, they will rate it higher. And of course, we made practical implications from this paper as well. And in fact, this was before the paper, the initial goal of our study to inform the retail industry. And essentially what we showed is that given that consumers are focusing on the price, functionality, and the quality, this is something that the companies would have to highlight and really put towards the targeted marketing, is highlighting that ease of access and the personal benefits, in addition to highlighting the ecological impact. In terms of targeting the environmentally aware consumers, we are showing that it's mainly the younger generation and the male consumers who are aware. So it's important to be aware of them, and it can be an interesting hiring perspective as well for the companies to hire and retain this younger talent. But in terms of the circular initiative, and as we are transitioning to the circular economy, the study underlines clearly that there is an interest towards the environmental aspect of these new products, and people are aware of what the circular economy is. But it's still important in some of the aspects, for example, when there is a personal consumable, to also educate the consumers, to really explain where those products are coming from or how these products are being made by the company. And as for, again, the main aspect of the study on looking at the different types of products, in terms of the packaging and consumables, household products, and electronics, these are more, I would say, or we would say, the low-hanging fruits here, that it's easier for companies to maybe to market this because they have a higher perceived performance rate and consumers are showing a higher willingness to buy and pay these products. Whereas with the personal health consumable and cosmetics, they are showing a lower perceived performance and lower willingness to buy and pay. And therefore, this is what requires more attention from companies, managers, and policymakers to really balance out those perceived risks and show really the benefits of how it can be useful for them. And so essentially with this study, we are aiming to contribute to the idea that understanding consumer dynamics is important to transition to the circular economy. Us consumers, we are a key part of this new economy, and it's important for businesses and policymakers to understand some of these ups and downs and some of the risks and benefits as well. So I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation now, and please let me know if you have any questions.